even beginners and mid-level developers still struggle to understand asynchronous JavaScript the right way. I'm not even kidding. Even they struggle to completely understand it. There's a lot of syntax and concepts that they still struggle to understand, and they're sort of winging it. They're sort of dealing with it, Googling here and there. But if you learn it the right way, I bet you're never going to forget these concepts. All right. So let's get started. So in this webinar, we will be covering these topics, right? Firstly, we'll get a solid understanding of what synchronous code is, what asynchronous code is, right? And how you can identify asynchronous code easily as well, right? And then secondly, we'll talk about callbacks. Okay, what are the importance of callbacks? Why is it so important in the asynchronous world? And what are the utility? Where are they used? And we'll take some live examples and we'll go through with it, right? Callbacks are something that's been used before. We've come a long way. And we've come a long way. We've sort of moved away from callbacks because they come with a lot of disadvantages. Okay, we'll talk about a couple of disadvantages as well. So namely callback hell, pyramid of doom, which is a very popular interview question. Okay, so do pay attention to it. We've got readability issues, complexity, nested nature. And then after talking about the disadvantages of callbacks, we'll see how promises sort of overcome the disadvantages of callbacks, right? Promises have been built in a way that, it makes working with asynchronous operations a lot more easier and simpler. Okay. But even the promises have certain disadvantages. Okay. We'll discuss a little bit about that, and we'll see what are we currently doing? What are the developers that have built that is currently working, that is currently makes it much more easier to work with asynchronous JavaScript. And that is called async await. We'll talk about that as well. And finally, we'll top it off with what are the interviewer favorites, what sort of questions you can expect in interviews. Because if you pay attention to this webinar, I think that you'd be able to understand pretty much any question that the interviewer throws at you. Okay. So, all right, let's get started. All right. So basically, what is synchronous and asynchronous code, right? So synchronous code, as you can imagine, we'll jump to the live examples in my code editor in a little bit. But just to give you a high-level overview, synchronous code is something that executes really fast. It doesn't wait for anything, right? It executes as fast as your computer is capable of executing, right? There's no pauses. Whereas asynchronous code, on the other hand, takes a little bit of time. Okay, if you can think about a few concepts in real life where asynchronous operations would be happening. For example, if you want to fetch data from the server, that takes some 0.5 seconds or 1 second or 2 seconds or even 5 seconds, right? Querying the database, that takes a little bit of time. If you want to read some file, from your system, that takes a little bit of time, right? Making network requests, one application talking to another application, that takes a little bit of time. So they all come under asynchronous code, right? So let me pull up my editor. All right. Close it all up. There's a lot of junk here. Okay. Okay, guys. So what you see here is that this is just an example. I'm just logging 3 statements here. We've got start, middle, and end. Okay. How do I pull this away? Okay. I don't think you'll be able to see it. Okay, fine. Okay. So what you're looking at currently, what do you think would be executed when I run this? Okay. I'm just going to say node. And what is the name of the file? Synchronous versus asynchronous. Okay. When I run this, as you can expect, it's just going to synchronously execute from top to bottom, right? And one more thing that I want you to understand really well is that JavaScript is single-threaded. Okay. Single-threaded. Because JavaScript is single-threaded, it only has one thread. It can only do one thing at one time. So JavaScript is going to start at the very start, execute this, log it to the console, right? Log start to the console, and it's going to move on to the next statement. It's going to execute middle and then move on to the next statement and execute end. Okay, let's see this in live action. So I'm just going to hit enter. Great. You see here, we've got start, middle, and end. Very simple. This is synchronous code. But what if I introduce some asynchronous operation to it, right? Let's do it. We're not going to be making some, complicated network requests or, querying the database because we haven't set up any of this infrastructure, given this is just a webinar. But what we can do is simulate that. Okay, so let's simulate that using a function that JavaScript provides called set timeout. Okay, so let's just understand set timeout a little bit to those of you who are completely new to JavaScript. Set timeout is okay. Set timeout is just a function. Okay, and this function takes two arguments. Okay, the first argument is just going to be a function. Okay, so let's put function. Okay, and the second argument is how much time after which you want JavaScript to execute. I'm sorry, Ritesh, I don't think we allow recording this locally. So I'm going to have to deny, but we will send you the recording later on in the email if you do personally request it to us. Okay, this is against our policy. Thank you. All right, guys. So as I was saying, set timeout is just a function, and that function takes two arguments. The first argument is just going to be a function which you want executed after a set amount of time. So the second argument, I'm just going to mention after 2000 milliseconds, which is just 2 seconds. Okay, so after 2 seconds, you want this function to be executed. So let's just see this in live action. Let's say 2 seconds over. All right. So if I run this, what happens is it waits for 2 seconds, and then after 2 seconds, it is 2 seconds over. Okay, so this is asynchronous code. It takes a little bit of time to finish. That's the whole point. All right, let me do another thing. Set timeout. I'm just going to say 1 second, and then I'm going to move this middle here. Okay, let's execute it now. So we also said that JavaScript is a non-blocking. JavaScript is non-blocking. It doesn't wait for. Basically, it only moves on to the next line once it is done executing this line, right? But what happens when it encounters a set timeout? Essentially, what it's going to do is it's going to execute start. It's going to see, okay, this is going to take a little bit of time. I'm just going to come back to it after 1 second, execute this function. I'm not going to stop. I'm just going to move on to the next line. Okay, so let's execute it now. Do you see what happens? We have the start, which is printed, and then it doesn't wait for this to be finished. It just prints end, right? And after 1 second, it prints the middle at the very last, right? So this is what JavaScript does. It doesn't wait. It waits for nobody. It has just one thread. It just keeps on executing. And then after a set amount of time, whatever function that you passed in here, it's going to get executed. So to those of you who do not understand what this is, it is basically just a function. This is just another syntax, another way of writing a function, which makes it much more cleaner and easily readable, right? It's called an arrow function. Okay. So now that we understand a little bit about what synchronous and asynchronous is, let's move on to the next thing. Okay. So as you can see, asynchronous code in JavaScript executes one task at a time, blocking further execution until the current task is completed. As I said, it completes this, only moves on to the next thing. Okay, it completes this and only moves on to the next thing. But because this is asynchronous, let's look at the definition. Asynchronous code allows multiple tasks to be initiated without waiting for each to finish, enabling the program to continue executing other tasks in the meantime. Right? Using asynchronous operations, you can do 100 things at the same time. Okay, and it's not going to block the rest of your application. Okay, a real world example that you would have all encountered is that you go to a website and then there's a pop-up shows up, right? A pop-up shows up and they would have written the code in such a way that, okay, open the pop-up as soon as the user lands on the web page. After 2 seconds, automatically close the pop-up, right? And this is what happens. It's just a set timeout function. It's just an asynchronous operation happening there, right? All right. Now, I also want to cover another thing. Okay, I want to ask you a question. Did you spot the callback function in this code that I've written? Yeah, Harshal. That's a good question. So that's what I was saying, right? JavaScript is single-threaded. And yes, it doesn't execute it. Okay. So what JavaScript basically does is all the asynchronous operations is given to the browser. Okay, it just JavaScript. Okay, JavaScript is very dumb. It can only execute one thing at a time. It just executes, and goes down. And whenever it encounters anytime an asynchronous operation is encountered, what JavaScript does is, okay, this takes a little bit of time. Okay, so it's going to tell the browser, hey browser, okay, this is an asynchronous operation. After 1 second, tell me when to execute it. I'm just going to execute the callback. Okay, so the task of exactly. So the task of figuring out when that 1 second is done is taken care of by the browser. Okay, not by JavaScript. When the browser says, okay, 1 second is done, JavaScript is going to execute the callback function. Yasir is asking, is set timeout part of the JavaScript? Actually, no. Set timeout is not part of JavaScript. It is a browser API. That's a very good question, actually. It doesn't belong to JavaScript. It's a completely similar to fetch operation. These are all browser-based APIs, which do not belong to JavaScript. But these are a little complicated topics that we'll get into in a little bit. Okay. So let's talk about callbacks, because callbacks are extremely important, right? So if you see the set timeout that I've written, right? So essentially, this is a function, and we are passing another function inside of this function, right? So this other function that we passed inside that we want executed as soon as a set time is elapsed, that is a callback function. To put it in simple terms, a callback function is just a function passed inside of another function. Okay, so we can also do it like this. Okay, the print value. All right, I'm just going to say console logs, same middle. All right, sorry, there's an arrow function there. So let me remove this and put the print value here, right? So this is a function that we're passing inside of set timeout, which is another function. So this becomes a callback function. Okay, so this is very important to understand. Let's move on to the next thing. So if you see, what is a callback? A callback is essentially just a function that is passed inside of another function. And if you think about it in the asynchronous operation concept, this whole concept, there's a lot of things that are happening. It could be, fetching some data from the server, or it could be communicating with another application. So when you're doing all of this, after, let's say, after querying a user from the database, you want to do something with that data, right? Let's say my name is Harish. So I'm telling JavaScript, okay, fetch all the information that you have about the user Harish. The call goes, after 2 or 3 seconds, it comes back with the data. So you want to do something with the data, right? So you're passing in a callback that will be executed after the operation is done. That is what a callback function is. Okay. So let's look at a few more examples with callbacks, guys. So this you'll get a much more better sense using these examples. Okay. All right. So as I said, callback is just a function that is passed as an argument to another function. It is used to handle asynchronous operations. It could be reading a file, making network requests, interacting with databases, and so on. So essentially, we're just telling JavaScript, hey, when you're finished doing this, call this next, right? So let me clean this up a little bit. Yeah, I'm not sure. All right. Not sure what's happening here. I think we have to adjust the permissions a little bit because let me stop it and share it again, guys. I think there is some mishap here. All right, we're back. Okay. So all that I'm going to do now is I'm going to write a function called hello. Okay. This is a simple function hello, which is going to log hello. Okay. Now I'm going to write another function, which is going to log goodbye. Okay. Let us run this code now. Okay, we haven't invoked it yet. Let's invoke it. Hello, and then goodbye. Okay. When we invoke it, okay, we are still running the wrong code, right? Okay. Okay. So if you see here, we've got hello and goodbye. right? Very simple. This is an asynchronous thing. It doesn't take any time. So the first thing gets executed and the second thing gets executed. What if this hello function takes a little bit of time? As in, what if there is some asynchronous operation being performed here, or some intensive process happening here? Okay, not intensive, but just an asynchronous operation. In that case, I'm just going to simulate it with the same set timer that I discussed with you. Okay, the first function, as I told you, is going to be a function, and I'm going to invoke this after 1 second, move it up here. Okay, let's execute it now. Let's see what happens. Okay, if you see that first we have goodbye and then we have hello, which is not the ideal thing. This is not what we were expecting, right? We want hello to be first and goodbye to be second, despite there being an asynchronous operation. So how can we do this? How can we achieve this? With callbacks. Okay. So what, instead of calling goodbye here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass goodbye inside of hello. Okay. So what am I doing here? I'm passing this goodbye instead of hello, and hello is going to receive an argument. And that argument is going to be the callback function. I'm not going to say goodbye here. I'm just going to say something like callback. This is the industry standard. Okay. So we have the callback here, and I'm going to call the callback right below the hello. Now I'm going to execute it again. Now, if you see, it's going to wait for 1 second, and then it's going to print hello and goodbye. Okay. So you see, even despite there being an asynchronous operation, because of callback that we're passing inside of hello, the execution is in the right order. So this is the power of callbacks, right? Let's write another function as well, right? Let's do, wave. Okay, waving. Okay, I can do the same thing. Instead of this callback, I can pass in this wave in here and then execute. And now after 1 second, it's going to say hello and wave. I can also push this a little further. Okay, I'm just going to say display value. Okay, and I want a variable to be passed inside of this display value. Let's say it's value. Okay, and I'm going to console it. So now let's pass this display value inside of this hello. So the display value is being passed as a callback to hello. Okay, and this callback now takes a value, right? So I'm going to pass this as operation done. Okay, now if you see, we have hello and operation done. Okay, so now we understand how callbacks work and how, in the context of asynchronous operations, why they're important. So to just summarize it, whenever you make an asynchronous operation, you want something else to happen once the data is fetched. So to tell JavaScript, do this, so you pass in a callback function to the asynchronous operation. All right. So let's move on to the next thing. All right. What is wrong with callbacks? Okay. So far, the implementation has been very simple. So I don't think you'll be able to see any huge problems or anything. Okay. Okay. Let's take this example, guys. Okay. So we just have this function. Okay. Don't worry about the implementation of the function. Just imagine there's a function called query database. Okay. The query database takes in the first argument to be user Harish. Okay. And the second argument is the callback function. So we're telling the method, fetch all the information pertaining to this particular user. If the operation of fetching the user from the database succeeds, this user information, this user will have the result of the fetch. If the fetching fails for some reason or the other, be it a network failure or a server downtime or whatever, this error is going to have some information. Okay. So you understand what callbacks is. Now let's take this a little bit further. Okay. So we're fetching all the information. The user actually has the user is basically just an object with multiple information about me. It could be my name, it could be my age, it could be my designation, it could be my interests, hobbies, whatever. Right. It also seems to have my profile image URL. Okay. So user.profile image URL, I'm putting it inside of a variable. And now I want to get the picture using that particular URL. So there is an other method inside of the upper method, right? And that is get picture. So I'm passing, this is just some server. I'm attaching this image URL to this URL. Okay. This is also an asynchronous operation, right? First, there was an asynchronous operation. With the result, we are making another asynchronous operation, right? And that also takes in a callback here. If you see, this also takes in a callback. If there is an error, the error would get printed. If there is an image, the image would get, we basically just get the image. Okay, let's go to the next slide. All right. Okay, this is actually not picture, this is just image, okay? So now with the image that I've received from the server, what I now want to do is I want to transform that image to a particular format. Okay, let it be in PNG, I want to change it to JPEG, right? And that also is an asynchronous operation, right? So I'm going to pass that image here, this is actually image, and that is going to take a little bit of time. And once that is done, we are telling JavaScript execute this particular callback, and this PNG is going to have have the value, right? So if there is an error, we're going to handle the errors here. If we actually get the image, now I want to do another asynchronous operation. Now I actually want to send that picture as an email to my friend, right? So that is also an asynchronous operation. That takes a little bit of time. So I'm going to send that email to this particular user, and then there is another logging. So if you see here, there is an operation inside of the callback function. There's another operation inside of that. We have another operation. So if you see the last bit of code sits somewhere right in the middle of the entire function. This is the last message that is sitting right in the middle, right? So because there is so much nesting happening, you can see that there is a triangular shape getting formed. Okay, there's a triangular shape getting formed, and this makes readability extremely difficult. Okay, right now we only have, this is very simple, this is very straightforward. We only have 4 asynchronous operations happening. But what if there are close to 50 asynchronous operations happening, each one dependent on the previous one, each one dependent on the previous one? You can imagine how many nesting that would be happening, right? This is an image from the internet that I found. Even with just 5 nesting, you can see that there is a huge triangle being formed. And this is called the pyramid of doom. This is called the pyramid of doom or the callback hell, which is a very popular interview question. Okay, the interviewers, the first couple of interviews that I've attended, there's been a lot of interviewers who asked me, why are callbacks not efficient? Why do we have to move to promises? Right? This is the reason. The callback hell is the reason. You can give them the same example as well. Right? All right. So let's look at some of the disadvantages of callbacks. Firstly, we've got the readability issue that I told you. It's very difficult to read. As developers, we are used to reading things from top down, right? Even beginners, we are used to linear operations, sequential execution of operations is what we're used to. But callbacks makes it very difficult to read. Complexity, obviously. It is also difficult to debug. It is nested and not linear, which is what I just mentioned. We have a loss of control flow happening. If something were to go wrong, it becomes difficult to identify where things went wrong, right? And we also have synchronous, asynchronous ambiguity. To those of you who do not know what ambiguity is, it's just confusion. We are confused whether it is a synchronous operation or an asynchronous operation. I'll give you an example. Okay. So now you know, okay, because it's a set timeout operation, we are passing in a callback, and we know this is an asynchronous operation. But sometimes, let's say there is an array here. Okay, 2, 4, 5, some array here. In JavaScript, there's a very popular method called map or for each. A for each method basically just loops over every single item of the array, and whenever it is at one particular item, it gives you a callback with the value. Okay, so I'll give you an example. So for each, and then we pass in the callback here, and each callback is going to have the current item, and then we can print all the items, right? So let me run it now. You see how quickly it happened? There is no waiting time. Looping through an array is, there is no waiting time. But despite there is no waiting time, we're still passing in a callback here. So what I mean to say is, just because we are passing in a callback does not mean that every callback involved function is an asynchronous operation. This is completely synchronous, guys. There is no data fetching happening from anywhere, right? So you can see that there's a lot of confusion happening with callbacks. So that is why we have this new paradigm that developers have sort of come up with called promises. All right. So let's quickly look at that. Yeah. So these are disadvantages, and the answer to that is promises. Okay. Understanding promises so simple, so easy, but there's a lot of even mid-level developers who confuse it so much. But I'll give you a very easy way for you to understand promises. It is extremely similar to a promise in real life. Okay. If I were to promise that I'm going to deliver the best asynchronous JavaScript webinar ever, okay, if I promise you that, and I actually succeed in that, it is said that the promise is resolved. Okay, you see this keyword here. It is said that the promise is resolved. But if I fail to deliver on my promise, it is said that the promise that I made has been rejected. Okay, these are the keywords that you have to understand in JavaScript. So in JavaScript terms, it is just an object that contains information whether an asynchronous operation has succeeded successfully or failed or still in the pending state. Okay, so let's quickly dive into an example. Okay. All right, I'll just start from the very start. Okay. So how can you create a promise? That begs the question, how can you create a promise? It's very simple, straightforward syntax. Okay, I'm just going to create P. This is where I'm going to hold the promise value. How can you create it? You can create it with the promise constructor. Whenever you're talking about constructors and classes, which is a separate topic altogether, but understand the high level overview, we create it using the new keyword and we say promise. That's it. Now this promise function takes in one executor function. Okay, so let's put it as a callback method. It's not a callback, sorry, it's just a function. Okay, it's not a callback, just a function. Okay, now this function is going to have two arguments here. Okay, so we have the resolve and we have the reject, which I just told you, right? Resolve and reject. So whenever there's an async operation succeeds, we'll call the resolve. Whenever there's an async operation that fails, we'll call the reject. All right. So let's do some very quick simple operation. Let's say a is equal to 1 plus 1. Let's say, okay, 1 plus 2. Okay. If a is equal to 3, okay, if a is equal to 3, I'm going to say that the asynchronous operation has been successful. So I'm going to call the resolve method. Okay. I'm just going to call this. Okay, let's just keep it very simple for now. But if this were to fail, I'm going to think that the async operation has been failed. So I'm going to call the reject method. Okay. So now it begs the question, how can we actually get the result of an asynchronous operation? Okay, just think of it as, okay, we're fetching some information from an async from a database or a server or whatever, right? So we need to actually hold that value in order to do something with it, right? So that means we have to consume that promise. Okay, so pay real close attention to the terminology that I'm using. We have to consume the promise. Okay, so what did I tell you in the definition that I told you? Initially, a promise is in the pending state. Okay, it is still ongoing. The asynchronous operation is still ongoing. If it is ongoing, we call it pending. Okay, if it is a success, we call it resolved. If it is a failure, we call it rejected. Okay, so now let's say P. So we consume a promise by using the keywords then, catch, or finally. Okay, that's it. Very simple. We have three methods that we can use to consume a promise. Then, catch, and finally. Then is what will be called when an asynchronous operation is a success. Okay. Catch is what will be called when there is an error in the asynchronous operation. And finally will be called, it doesn't matter if it's a then or a catch. It doesn't matter if it's a then or a catch. Finally will always be executed at the very end. Okay, I see there's a couple of messages here. Let me just quickly, promise are only for async operations. Absolutely, Harshal. Promises are built only for asynchronous operations. Callbacks are for sync and async. Promises just for async. What is P here? Is pre occupied some value before the execution? Yes. Yes, Yazar. So what I'm doing here is that I'm initiating a promise, right? The minute I write this executor function, the JavaScript will start to execute it. Okay. And we are basically returning that promise object to and storing the promise object in a variable called p. Okay, this is just a promise object. Okay, we are creating the promise using this syntax, and then we're storing the promise here. And now we are going to discuss about how we can extract the result of an asynchronous operation using this promise object. Okay, it will make sense a little bit more once we go through with it. Okay, so let's just call it, this is the industry standard, we just call it as p. All right, or it could be anything else, guys. Okay, it depends on you, but make it readable is what I'd say. Okay, so now what did I tell you? We can use then, we can use catch, we can use finally. Okay, I'm also going to put here, okay, this is the response of the asynchronous operation. I'm going to put it is a success. Okay, and then I'm also going to put the value. Okay? I'm also going to put the value of a. If it is rejected, it got rejected. Okay, so let's see how we can consume this from p. See, if I were to just console log this p, what do you think would happen? Okay, I'm just going to say console log p. Okay, run node promises 1. Okay, it's just going to say promise it is a success 3. Okay, this is not what we expect. We only want this particular string here, right? We want that particular string alone. So there is a certain way of going about promises. If this takes a little bit of time, okay, if we say set timeout, okay, set timeout, and then okay, execute this resolve only after 1 second, we won't even see this, it is a success. We only see it as a success because it's a synchronous operation. It looks like a synchronous operation. It's very instantaneous. But usually promises are built for async operations. So I'm simulating it with a set timeout. Okay, so let's run it now. You'll only see pending. Okay, you won't actually get the response here. Okay, so how can you get the response? We can get the response using then. So I'm going to say p.then. And this then method would get executed whenever the promise is a success. Okay, and it takes in a callback function as well. Okay, here the result would be there. Okay, and we can say console.log result. Simple. Okay, so this might take 3 seconds, 5 seconds, whatever. After 5 seconds, if we put here 5 seconds, after 5 seconds, this then method will be called. After 2 seconds, then method would be called. Okay. Now, what if a is not equal to 3? What if it changes 1 to 2? Okay, in that case, it won't go inside of this if, right? Because a is not equal to 3, it would go into this else. So in that case, the promise is said to be rejected. So in order to consume the rejected value, what you can do is you can put catch. Okay, and that takes in a callback function as well, and we can put a console log or a console one. Okay, let's see this. Let's see this in action, guys. Okay, so what happens here? After 1 second, it waits for 1 second, and after 1 second, it prints it is a success, right? This is not getting executed. This is where the console log is happening, right? And then whenever we change the value to, let's say, 3 or 4, and then rerun it again, we can say it got rejected. Okay, so these are promises. I'll give you another example as well, okay, so that you will get a much more stronger grasp of it. All right, so what we're going to do now is, all right, okay, so just pay attention to the function that I've written. Okay, I've just written watch nucleus webinar. This is the name of the function. Okay, let's just quickly see if there is some promises to handle inversion of control or callback help. Yes, sir. It is partly used to handle the callback help, because I'll talk about how chaining can be used in promises, which actually simplifies the whole process of writing promises, and it makes readability as well a little bit easier. We'll get to that in a minute. So just look at the function. Okay. All right. Yeah, we'll talk about, okay, so this function is built with callbacks. This function is not actually built with promises. Okay, we'll see how with promises, the same function can be built a little bit better. How promises are better than callbacks. So we'll actually compare both. Okay, so currently we have a function that is written with callbacks, and we saw a lot of disadvantages with that as well, right? So we have a function called watch nucleus webinar, and that takes in a positive callback. Okay, if the asynchronous operation is success, if it is fulfilled, right, we invoke this positive callback. If there's been an error, we call this error callback. Okay, so here if you see, if the user left, it's going to be an error. It's going to be a total failure, guys, right? Or if the user is not paying attention, if you're not actually learning from this webinar, then it's going to be a failure as well, right? So in both these cases, I'm writing error callback. But if you're actually paying attention, the execution is going to go into the else block, and then I'm going to return thumbs up. Okay, let's write the callback functions as well. Okay, I'm going to invoke the watch nucleus webinar here. Watch nucleus webinar, the first callback. Okay, this is going to be the first callback. In this first callback, I'm getting this is a positive callback, right? In that case, I'm just going to get the message or the result or whichever. Okay, console.log message. The second argument is going to be another callback, which is the error callback. Okay, I'm going to say this is the error object. Okay, in this error object, I'm going to say console.log. The error object is going to have two properties. We've got name as well as message. So let's use a string literal here. Okay, name is equal to let's say error object dot name. Okay, let's put the string literal here. Okay, or we can just wait. All right, and next we're going to use message. Okay, the message is going to be another dot message. Okay, so now does this make sense, guys? You see how we are actually passing in both these callbacks to this function so that we can actually understand if it is a positive or a failure. Okay, so let's execute it now. Initially, if you see that the user has not left, the user is not paying attention is now true actually. Okay, if somebody is not paying attention, it's not going to be a failure, it's going to be a failure, right? So that is right now true, right? So let's see what happens here. Let's execute it. So yeah, we get it right. The name, user is not paying good attention, and the message is this thing, right? So this error callback is getting called. So this is the first error callback, and the second callback is going to get called, and it's going to print everything out. But if we're going to make it as false, okay, if we make it as false, we get a thumbs up, right? We're using callbacks and achieving the entire thing. Now we're going to talk about how we can use promises, okay, and make this entire code better. We talked about how there is a callback hell happening, and we don't want to worry about all of that. We want to make it as simple as possible. So let's see how we can transform this entire function such that we are using promises instead of callbacks. Okay, so I'm just going to remove this, or let me comment it out. Okay, so this is built using callbacks, and now I'm going to move to promises. Let's write the same function in a promise way. Okay, so I'm just going to say function, the same watch nucleus webinar. I'm going to differentiate it with a promise. Okay, so because we are writing a promise function, we don't take in callbacks or anything, right? So I'm going to say I'm just going to return a promise here. And as I told you, it takes in an executor function, and that executor function is going to have a resolve and a reject, resolve and a reject, right? So what are we doing here, guys? We are first checking if the user is left or not. If the user is left, we are triggering this error callback. So let's try to do the same thing with a promise. If user left is true, then the error callback now is going to be this reject. So we're going to say reject. Okay, let's copy this object and put it here. Okay, the next thing, else if. What do we have here? If the user is not paying attention, also we trigger the error callback. Let's put it here. This is also a reject. Okay, let's copy the name and message. Finally, the user is actually paying attention. You guys are learning something, right? If that is the case, resolve. Right? In this resolve, I'm just going to say thumbs up. So we saw this is how we consumed callbacks. We don't actually call it consume. Okay, we're just invoking it and passing in two callbacks here. But let's see how we can actually consume this promise, right? So we do it using, okay, the same syntax that we followed, right? Const p. And now we're going to invoke this function. And only after we invoke it, we get the promise here. That's why I've done it. Okay. So now we've instantiated the promise. So how do we consume the promise? With then and catch. Okay. So using then, we can say the positive, if the asynchronous operation were to succeed, we have the value here. Okay. Let's say, okay. If it were to fail, catch. Okay. Beautiful. That is it, guys. How simple is this? Okay. Let's uncomment it. Yeah. Do you see the difference? We don't have to pass in a huge callback function every single time. All we got to do is use then and catch. Makes it a lot simpler. Okay. You can also chain it. Okay. You see? Okay. You see how the execution of that goes from top to down vertically and not really nested? It is not getting nested here. It is actually going top down. We can actually attach several then here. Okay. Result 2. Right? Result 1, result 2. You get what I'm saying? If this function, let's say this is another asynchronous operation, and we return that asynchronous operation here, the response of that would come to this then, right? Response 2. And if there is another asynchronous operation here, the response of that will come to this then. So you see, as the number of nested asynchronous operations go up, it doesn't actually follow the callback hell. It actually goes from top to down, right? So this is called nesting. Sorry, this is called chaining. Okay, this is a very important concept that you need to know pertaining promises, which is chaining. Okay, promise chaining. All right. So this is this is an advantage when it comes to callbacks. When you work with a large code base, you can see that this is what is being followed. But this is what was followed until a couple of years ago, until developers all came together and built an even better, more efficient way, much more readable way that even an 8th grader would be able to understand asynchronous JavaScript. Okay. And that is called async await. Okay. So let's quickly just see a couple of all right, let me just close this up. Okay. So what do we have here? Promises also provide an easy to use utility functions that make life easier as well. Okay, this is something that we've overlooked. Let's come back. This is a very popular interview question, guys. Okay, let's come here. Okay, so what I've done is I've written 3 promises here, guys. Okay, we don't need all of this. Okay, the understanding of this would further cement your understanding of promises. This also exposes a lot of problems that callbacks had, which promises solve. So let's get right into it. So what I've done is we have 3 methods here, three promises that we've instantiated. Okay. So the first one is prepare webinar 1. So preparing a webinar takes a little bit of time. Let's just consider that to be an asynchronous operation. Okay. And now we have prepare webinar 2. That also takes a little bit of time. Prepare webinar 3, same thing. Okay. And now we're just resolving everything. We're just resolving everything. Okay. So these are 3 different promises. How can we consume it? Prepare webinar 1 dot then. Okay. Response 1. Right. It could just be response as well. Yeah. Response. Right. Response. Similarly, we have prepare webinar 2 Okay, the same response. Let's just copy this, paste it. Okay, these are 3 different promises and we're consuming that. If I execute it, straightforward guys. Webinar 1 prepared, webinar 2 prepared, webinar 3 prepared. It's because webinar 1 is at the very top, that gets resolved the fastest. And secondly, we've got webinar 2, which resolves the second and then third. Okay, but what if I actually make an asynchronous operation here? It could be a set timeout. Okay, after 2 seconds. Preparing webinar 1 takes a little bit more time than preparing webinar 2 and 3. Okay, so in this case, what happens? We've got webinar 2 and 3 first coming here. See, webinar 2 is coming here first, webinar 3 is coming here second, and finally, after 2 seconds, we've got webinar 1 coming. Okay, so now I have a requirement to you. Let's say you're building an application. There are 3 calls that you're making. Okay, similar to this preparing thing, you're making 3 calls, and I want you to execute a function, and I want you to execute the function only after all the 3 promises have been settled. All the 3 promises have been resolved. In that case, callbacks cannot do anything. It is very difficult to do it with callbacks. There is no option to do it with callbacks also. But promises provide an extremely easy way, an easy interface for you to do that. And you can do that with utility functions. Okay, static utility functions of promises. Okay, let's see how we can do it. Let's remove it. Okay, so there is a function, there is a method inside of the promise constructor itself called all. Okay, so this all is going to take an array of promises. Okay, so in this case, what I'm doing is I'm putting the webinar 1 here, putting the webinar 2 here, putting the webinar 3 here. Okay, all these 3 things are promises. This one takes 2 seconds, this one takes this is instantaneously done, this takes maybe 3 seconds, right? And I want to execute a function after all of it is resolved. So this is what all allows you to do. So let's look at the response now. Okay, let's run it again. Okay, it's waiting for 2 seconds. Boom. You see that? We're actually getting an array of all the results of all the promises. Webinar 1, webinar 2, and webinar 3. In the exact same order, we put it here. How beautiful is that? There could be a lot of requirements in your future jobs where you have to make several different API calls. And only after you get all the information, you have to do some operation. That is what this allows you to do. Beautiful, isn't it? There could be another operation, there could be another requirement in your future job where the manager might say, okay, you have to make 3 API calls. Whichever is the first one that you get, you have to execute it. Whichever is the first one that you get, execute the function right away and use that value. In that case, you'll use promise.race. Okay, what race allows you to do is, whichever is the first one to be executed, that value is put here. Let's run it. Take a guess, guys. I want you to take a guess. Okay, in this case, which one would be racing to the very top? Okay, Rishabh says 3. 2. Dharmendra says 2. Anybody else, guys? Okay, the answer is 2, right? Because in the order that we've written the code, this sits at the very top, which is immediate. This takes a little bit of time, but this is instantaneous, right? So we get this value here. So let's run it. Okay, now that we put race here, let's run it. Beautiful. We say webinar 2 is prepared, right? So you can say if the interviewer were to ask you, is there a way that you can you can make multiple API calls and then, call a callback function with all the values or with just the first value that you get, you can use promise race or promise all. There's a lot of other static methods as well. I don't want to overload you with it, but yeah. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. So if you see the advantages of okay, so the advantages of promise is that there is no nesting, there is only chaining, right? Okay, Harshal is asking, how can you please write how to do promise chaining? Okay, So this is an interesting thing. I don't think we have a lot of time, but let me quickly cover it. Okay, Harshal. All right. Okay, let's say we have a promise. Okay, the promise. Okay. All right. Promise one. Okay. I'm just going to instantiate the promise right here. Resolve, reject. Okay. I'm going to return. I'm just going to resolve with 10. Okay. So how do I consume this value 10? Okay. Let's assume that this is an asynchronous operation. This is instantaneous as well. So I'm going to get 10 here. Okay. The value is 10. Okay. But what if I want to, chain it with another promise? Okay. If I were to return the same value, it's called a tenable object, guys. Okay. This is a little complicated to cover it in just 1 hour, but this is a tenable object, and that also can be tacked on with another then. Okay. So in this value, we also get the returned value of this value. So this would be 10 as well. Okay. So in this case, what I'm doing is I'm just going to do value into 10. Okay. So right now, initially there's a 10 getting here, and then we're returning it and we're tacking it on with another, then we're getting the same 10 here, and then we're multiplying it with another 10. So if we do another then here, what will we get here? We'll get 100 here. Now I want to do 100, the result plus, let's say 2. Okay, doesn't matter. Okay, and finally what I'm going to do is I'm just going to console it out. Okay, you should see 102 printed. Okay, let's not waste any more time. Beautiful. You see 102 printed. So this is called chaining. You can actually, it looks like it's all on the same line, but you can actually put it like this. Makes it really neat. Okay, and if there's any asynchronous operation failing, you can just put a catch here and catch it. Right? We'll cover much more deeper soon, but since this is a webinar and webinars tend to be, it's not comprehensive enough, right? So we have to cut it short. But yeah, let's quickly look at the disadvantages of promises. Promise chaining. Okay, so when we talk about advantages, we've seen there is no nesting, there is only chaining. We also have the ability to run multiple promises at the same time. And it also gives you other utility methods like promise.all and promise.race. Okay. But there's also a couple of disadvantages when it comes to promises. Okay. Promise chaining as well, it affects readability to a certain extent. Right? It affects readability. It is also verbose. Verbose as in you have to type a lot of code in order to construct a promise. You see how you have to put a new and we have to put a promise and then we have to consume it like this, right? This is still not intuitive. As developers, we are used to looking at code execute top down without any distractions. First statement gets executed, second statement gets executed, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. That is what we're used to, right? So there is a better method that is a syntactic sugar for promises that makes it much more easier to deal with promises. Okay. So we've seen it's difficult to debug. It does not follow a linear execution as well. So the fix for all of this, it's called async await. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is, okay. Okay. I'm not going to type it up. Okay. So you see here, we have a function here, which is going to make a network request to Google. Okay. Very simple thing. Let's just assume it's Google. And then it takes 1 second. And then after the information comes back from Google, we are resolving it with Google says hi. If the network request to Google fails, we are saying we can only talk to Google. Okay. So whatever response we're getting, we are processing that response with another function, which is also an asynchronous operation. Okay. We're processing it here. So we are doing this with callbacks right now. Okay. So let's say make request Google. Okay. This returns a promise, right? This returns a promise, right? But promises can also be put .then, right? You can also put .then and chain it, right? So that's what we've done here. Make request Google. The execution comes here. The promise starts getting executed. And then after 1 second, we are actually resolving it. And that value is coming to the response, right? And we're passing that response inside of the second function, which is also an asynchronous operation, right? And then after this gets resolved, this then gets executed. And this value gets put in this callback. And then we're consoling logging it. Okay, let's quickly run it. Okay. Okay, do you see it? First, we're making the request to Google, and then we're getting the response received. We're making the request to Google, and then after we resolve it, the execution comes here, and then response received gets logged, right? And then after that, we are passing that response that we received into the process request method, and then processing response gets printed here. After that, we are resolving it with this thing. So this doesn't get printed. The execution after it gets resolved comes to this then. And then this information gets printed here. Clear, guys? I hope I'm not going too fast or anything. But yeah, extra information, Google says hi. So if you see here, using callbacks, you can see there's a lot of then catch. There is some amount of confusion happening here, right? Even with promises, it doesn't look very straightforward. It doesn't actually say first sentence, second sentence, third sentence. It is still a little confusing. There's still a little bit of nesting happening. Let's convert the same thing into async await, and we'll be able to see how easy, how amazingly crazy easy it is to work with async await, right? We'll be wondering, like, why did we even spend this much time learning promises? We're only learning this because, this is a very popular interview question, but there's a better way of doing it. Okay, let's see how we can convert this into async await. Okay, so don't worry about this. This is still going to be a make request. This is still going to take some time. Processing request, it's still going to take some time. Let's use async await. So in this case, I'm just going to have a function called main, right? And then I'm going to call this make request. But the response of the make request I have to save somewhere. So I'm just going to say result and then call the make request. Okay. And then I'm going to pass in Google here. Only if it matches with Google, it will actually go in here, right? I'm going to do that. But now this make request actually takes some time. It takes 1 second. So this makes it an asynchronous method, an asynchronous operation. But we have to tell JavaScript, okay, unless you're done with this, don't move on to the next code, because the next code is actually dependent on this result. So how can you tell it? You can tell JavaScript by saying await here. Okay. If you put await, JavaScript will know. We have to wait until this entire thing is done. It doesn't matter if it's 1 second, 2 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds. I'm not moving to the next line until this is done, until I get the resolve, until I get the result. Okay. And there is another error that you see here. What does it say? Await expressions are only allowed within async functions. So you also have to specify to JavaScript that the function that is going to encapsulate all these asynchronous operations, we have to put it as async here. Okay. We have to put it async. Only then the error would go away. Okay. So now we have the result. Google says hi. So with that result, I want to process it. Okay. So process the result. And then I'm doing the same await process request, and I'm passing this result inside of this process request. Okay. And finally, I'm consoling logging the processed result. Okay. That's it, guys. How easy is it? Do you see how easy is it? Async, await, and that's it. We get the answer. We don't have to do then catch. We don't have to do all of this chaining. We don't have to do any callback nesting, nothing. Async await makes it seem like it's a top to down bottom execution. Let me just call this main function right now. You'll see we'll get the same response. See, we're getting the same response, making request, processing response, and we're getting this. Simple, right? So this is all about async JavaScript. Okay, this is all about async JavaScript. So these are the advantages of async await. We've got the readability, which is a huge thing. It looks like synchronous code, but it is actually async. It looks synchronous, right? But it's actually async. easier error handling. If you want to handle errors, we can easily put it inside of a try catch, right? We can easily put this inside of a try catch. Okay. Right. Console.log, right? And anytime, okay. And anytime something were to fail in this async operation or this operation, the execution is going to come out of this try and it's going to come inside of catch, right? So let's try to do something. Okay, instead of Google, I'm just going to say Meta or Facebook. Okay, in this case, you can see that it says error. Error, we can only talk to Google. So this catch has caught the error. This is how simple async await makes it. That is all about async JavaScript. Any questions, guys? Any questions at all? No, no questions. Vamsi, do you have any questions? All right, guys, we've come to the end of the webinar. I hope you enjoyed it. We are actually, now that you've completely stayed till the very end, I'm going to send you, our team is going to send you a list of very popular interview questions that any popular questions that interviewers usually ask, that we'll be sending you a list of that to your emails. Okay, if you have any questions or if you want the recording for the session, do send us an email. I'll put the it's just contact or contact at nucleushq.io. You can always reach out to us and we'll send you the recording. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dharmendra. Means a lot. Okay, guys, I hope you have a great Saturday evening.